There are a lot of videos out there that talk about how to write, right? So how to write dialogue, how to plot, how to write a book, how to write novels, how to write stories. But none of them focus really on the learning, like how do we actually learn? And I've always been actually very interested in how do we learn? How do we actually absorb the stuff that we're told rather than just listening to a bunch of information, right? On this is how you write dialogue, this is what you do. But then how do you actually process that and how do you learn that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about learning today and how do we actually learn to write, not so much on how to write.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Hey, welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author. I'm also a professor and I teach writing. And it's one of the reasons that I decided to start making videos on writing and how to write. So again, today we're going to be talking about that sort of learning, like how do we actually absorb the stuff that we're talking about, that I'm talking about, that other authors are giving you advice on. So first I'd like to talk about how do we learn anything? And I'd like you to think back, all the way back to when you were a child and you learned pretty much everything, right? So when you learned how to walk, when you learned how to drink from a cup, when you learned how to actually write a letter, not a letter like a letter, but an actual letter, an A. How did you do that? Okay, and one of the things too is that when you think about how kids learn, they learn very quickly because within like 5 years of their life, they've learned an amazing amount of things, right? Well, what is it that they do? One of the things they do for sure is that they definitely try things. They don't lay there in their crib saying, I'm never going to walk. They don't sit there as a little kid when you give them a pencil and think, oh, am I even holding this right? Am I going to be able to do it? No, they actually don't even hold their pencil right. They just grab it, right? And then they start doing something. They just start trying things. And then the adults come in and say, well, no, hold it this way, or no, this is the shape of the letter, right? This is how you do that. This is how you sing. This is how you do certain things. And usually the child is receptive to that, right? They don't think that, oh my gosh, I'm being criticized and I'm never going to be able to write this letter and I'm never going to be able to sing that note. No, they're very receptive to that. So they try something and then they probably will fail, right? How many times do little kids fall down when they're riding a bike or when they're walking or whatever? But they try it and then they fail and then they try it again and then they fail again and then they try it again, right? So this is one of the things that as a learner, when we're learning something new, we want to be open to making mistakes, failing, and then being willing to try again. Whereas when we grow older, especially when it's something like writing, where we start to question whether we are a good writer or whether we can write, right? We start to compare ourselves with published authors or somebody who's been writing for a very long time, or all of that, right? So all of that comes in as you are learning something new, especially with writing. And then what happens is that we say, oh, well, I'm not really good at that. Well, kids don't really do that. Like they don't say, I'm not really good at riding a bike. I'm not really good at drawing. As they get older, they do, right? Then they start to look at other things and question themselves. But when they first start, they're willing to try different things. And the more they're willing to fail and do a bad job, the better they get because they do it again and again and again until it gets better. I remember my daughter when she was learning to draw, she would draw the same little girl over and over and over again. And it's like, why is she drawing the same little girl, right? And she's just perfected every time. I guess it was slightly different. Now, I'm not an artist. I can't really tell, but she did it over again. She filled up journals with the same little drawing of the same, and it looked the same to me. To her, there was probably a slight difference because she was getting better. She was doing it better and better. Even if she was doing it the same, she was doing it again and again and again. So that's one of the first things that if you're trying to learn how to write, I want you to be able to do is to be able to fail, not do it perfect, try it again, write a new story, write another story, write another story. until you have written so many stories that it starts to come easy and you start to see like, okay, this is where things are not going well. This is where I need to punch up the pacing. This is where I need to do certain things. Okay, so you're also listening to advice from writers. You're also reading books on writing, right? So you're still doing that, but you are continuing to try to do it yourself. And so, because what little kids do, right? We come by and we say, no, this is the way that you write. We need to add a period to the sentence. We need to do these things. And the child says, oh, okay. And then adds that to what they already know. So the next time they will add that. And if they don't, we remind them, right? Hey, you did a great job, but remember to put a period at the end of the sentence. Remember to capitalize the first line. Oh yeah. Okay. And then they're willing to fail. So as long as the teacher is kind and nice, right? Because if the teacher is criticizing them, then that's when the child starts to realize, oh, wait, I'm doing something bad, not I just need to perfect what I'm already doing. So, but if we don't get in their way, they learn by trying and failing and trying again. That's the first tip, is be open to that. Okay, the second thing that you'll notice by watching children, and I'm talking about children because this is, again, when we first start to learn as human beings, this is when we're really little. So they're the experts at learning. They know. So let's talk about the experts, right? Well, one of the things they do, the next thing they do, is that they're very focused. When they are learning something that they enjoy and that they like, they're very, very focused on it. They will do it again and again, and they will spend a lot of time with that, whatever it is that they're learning. For example, I'll use my son this time. He loved Legos. And a lot of little kids do, right? They play with Legos, they'll build all kinds of stuff. Well, this kid loved Legos, loved Legos, and he would create all kinds of things. Sometimes he would build exactly what the box told him to do, and sometimes he would build something completely different. And so I know one time he wanted toy guns. I didn't allow him to have toy guns, and so he just decided he was going to make his own. So he created a gun from Legos, used rubber bands, and it actually worked. He figured out how to make a spring that he could actually shoot the rubber band from this Lego gun. So parents that you tell them they can't have something, they'll make it themselves, right? So that's what he did. But when he was sitting down to do his math, he had like the attention span of, a tiny puppy. He would run or, do something, and then all of a sudden he had no attention for it at all. So he couldn't focus on that. Well, why couldn't he focus on that? Because he wasn't interested in that. So assuming that you love to write and you are interested in writing, then it shouldn't be too difficult for you to focus. Though as adults, we tend to have other things on our minds, right? And kids don't. They just the only thing he had to worry about was playing with those Legos. So if we can manage to do that, if we can manage to somehow tune out everything else that is in our life, right? Which is very hard to do. But if we can really, really focus, it's going to be easier for us to learn. So if we're listening to a video, if we're reading a book about writing, really, really focus on what you're doing and on that reading, on that listening. And then as you're reading that, pause every once in a while and think about, how can I apply this? How am I actually doing this? How can I apply this to my story, to my novel? So stopping, thinking, paying attention, really focusing, not thinking about anything else, not doing two things at once. I'm horrible at this, I have to admit. When I'm listening to a video, I may be listening to a podcast on dieting or whatever I happen to be interested in that day, painting something. I refinished a table not too long ago, so I watched some videos on refinishing furniture, but I don't do that, right? I don't focus on one thing like that. I have it playing in the background while I'm doing something else, and that's not good. It's not good for learning. My table did turn out well, I'm happy to say. I did watch it a few times and watched a few of them, but it's not a good practice, right? You want to, if you really want to learn. So with writing, we really want to learn, and writing's not easy. So we want to focus, we want to pay attention so that when we go back, we actually absorbed what we listened to, what we read, what people told us. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. I can keep actually going on that because there's other parts of it too, like actually taking notes when I go to conferences. Even though I've heard maybe some of the things that the speakers are sharing, they I will again, right? It's repetitive and it's good. I will still write down what they said because maybe something it will trigger something in my mind, and I'll think of a story that I'm writing. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember I should be doing that and I'm not doing that. So there's a lot to it, but at least really focusing on what you are reading and learning, it's going to be super helpful for you. Okay, and the last thing, at least the last thing I'm going to discuss today, because I'm sure there are many, many more things. I know there are many more things that help you to learn. But again, I'm just kind of going off using using my children, but using children in general. Um, and looking at how they learn. So the last thing is that children really think deeply about things and they ask questions. Okay, so it's not just like, oh yeah, it just goes over their head. And we tend to think that they don't, but they really do. And I can give you a million examples of how they do it. I'll give you one though. When I was teaching second grade and I was about to adopt my son, I had a little picture of him by my desk, and so my children, my students, knew that I was going to become a mom, and this was going to be my baby, and we talked about all that. And they're second graders, right? So how old are they? They're like what, 7 maybe. And one little boy, it was almost time for me to, and I was going to be gone for a little while. After I adopted my son. And so they knew that too, and they were going to have a substitute for a very, very short amount of time. And so I told him it's almost time for me to, go and pick up the baby and all of that. And so this one little boy says, "So are you going to love the baby?" And I said, "Well, of course I am. Of course I'm going to love him." So he gave me this pensive look and he said, "Well, how is that going to happen?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, "Well, at what point what was it he said? At what point will you start to love him? What causes love?" And I thought, wow, that is an amazing question for a little kid. Like, at what causes love? At what point do you start to love somebody? And it was, it still actually gives me chills when I think about it because it was such a deep question. It's like, how do you even answer? Where do you begin to answer a question like that? And it just shows you, though, that kids have, that they may not always ask you the questions, but they're having these very deep thoughts. Um, and I think as adults, sometimes we don't really think as deeply as we should about things. So asking those questions about writing, why, you should have uh, dialogue tags, let's say. Well, why? What effect does that have on the story? What effect does it have on the reader when they're reading that? How does that help pacing? So asking the deeper questions about the things that you're learning. So it's not so much like how do I do this? We tell you how to do this, right? But how are you incorporating that? What questions are you asking yourself about the information and the advice that you're getting, and how can you apply that to your novel? So thinking deeper, asking questions. A lot of the information and advice that you get is simple when you think about it, but it's not simple when you actually put it into action in your work. So you want to spend some time thinking about that. And I remember writing and doing that, thinking, okay, well, why is this writer giving me this advice, and how is this exactly going to help my novel? How is it going to make my novel stronger? Okay, so if this is helping you, remember to hit that like button and the subscribe button. All right, so let's just recap real quick. First thing then or I don't know if the first thing, but one of the things that I want you to do is think clearly about your story and ask questions. And not only just about your specific story that you're writing, but ask questions about everything, about life, and write those down. Write the answers and the questions down, because eventually you will want to go back and look at that for future stories, for future story ideas. Okay, so just be curious about life, be curious about things, because that will end up helping you later on. Okay, the other thing is to stop being afraid to write poorly. It's part of the process. We all do it. We all write bad. We all go back and revise. It's just part of writing. It's part of that process. So get comfortable with that. Feel comfortable with not writing perfectly. And one of the ways that you can start feeling more comfortable is to get a guide, get a mentor, read a lot. Okay, go to conferences. So I've mentioned this before, but you want to do that because that helps you to improve. So yes, you might be writing poorly, but that's okay. You're going to keep writing, you're going to keep learning, and you're going to get better. So just kind of feel comfortable with not being perfect and just continuing to learn more skills and more techniques. Okay, the next thing is that I mentioned is you want to focus on your craft, focus on writing, focus on your story, because the more you do that, the better it's going to be. Try to avoid outside distractions because they get in the way, and it helps and it gets in the way of writing, right? So you're not going to write as well, you're not going to think as well if you've got a lot of distractions. So try to get rid of those and focus on your story. Okay, and then the last thing is remember that you want to love your story. You want to love what you're doing. Fall in love with writing. If for some reason you feel like you are no longer passionate about the story that you're writing, don't quit right away, because we all go through a process where we start to hate our story because we've been writing it for so long. We've been maybe editing it for so long, and we start to think that it's trash. So don't quit right away. But if you continue to go through it and you really find that for some reason that you're not passionate about the story, or as passionate as you thought you were going to be, or as excited as when you first started, then it's okay to let it go and do something else, or just put it aside. Don't do it right away, again, because our mind plays tricks with us, and sometimes we feel that it's not good, and we start to not like it. But if you honestly just, I have no passion for this anymore, I'm not really interested in this anymore, then that's when you want to say, okay, well, then I'm going to go on to another story that I love, because I want to love writing, because the more you love it, the more you're going to do it, right? And now if this happens again and again and again, then it's not that you're not in love with it, it's that you just don't want to finish your story. So be careful with that. But if you put one aside and you go on to something else that you love and you actually do finish it, then maybe the other one just wasn't the time for it, or you lost your passion for it, or for some reason there's some kind of mental block about that topic. So it's okay to let it go if it's you just have no love for it, because you want to love. We do the things that we love, and we're better at things that we love doing than we are obviously at things that we are not excited about. Because again, kids learn because they're excited; they want to learn. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to say is just make sure to schedule your writing. I've mentioned this before. I have other videos on that, but make sure that you're scheduling it, because if you schedule it, you will do it, and if you don't schedule it, you probably won't. All right, so I hope that this has been helpful. If it has, please again hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you again in my next video.